Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Sarah here. Thank you for joining me today for my first ever ink swatching video. I really struggled filming ink swatches. I got caught up in how I was writing things and doing it across 2 books. So this video was definitely a learning curve for me, but I'm trying to stay really committed to, putting myself out there even when things aren't perfect. So I hope you enjoy this video and the trial and error of it. Any tips on how you do your swatching videos, or if there are things in here you like or don't like, please let me know. I'll kind of share my thoughts throughout. But the ink that I'm swatching now is Robert Oster Thunderstorm, and I'm doing it across 2 books. I'm doing it in a Stalogy A6 half year and a Clairefontaine 90 GSM plain notebook. I'm using a Moonman or Mahjong N6 dip pen, glass dip pen, but I think for the cost really it's acrylic. I really like the dip pen, but I do find it feathers in the Stalogy. I try and wipe all the excess ink off it, but I haven't found the exact right way to get it to write nicely in the Stalogy just yet. I like the Robert Oster Thunderstorm. It's a nice black grey ink, maybe with a hint of a dark blue. I am definitely on the lookout for dark blackish inks, maybe that have a slight variation of colour to make it a little bit more interesting. But I'm definitely drawn to darker inks and darker colours at the moment. So I am looking forward to writing with this. I think it would be dark enough to, do long journal entries in. The next ink that I am swatching is Diamine Oxblood. Is it Diamine or Diamine? Can someone let me know? From the research I've done about Oxblood, it is very similar to Writer's Blood. Both have a somewhat cult following. A lot of people on Reddit talk about Oxblood. I wasn't drawn to this ink. It is a deep, rich red. I just can't see a purpose for it, for myself personally, with how I journal and plan. But if you are someone who does gravitate towards red inks, this is a really full, it's a rich ink. It's really nicely saturated. It would be dark enough to write in. It's got character, this ink. It's just not a ink that I can see myself using at the moment. I thought that Oxblood was darker than Writer's Blood, but I think I've got it mixed up. I would be really interested to see what Writer's Blood looks like. What I'm on the lookout for, or what I'm, searching for, is it's almost like maybe it's like a black brown or a black that has warmth to it. But this is just too red for me. It's not dark enough. You'll see as I switch between the 2 books, the dip pen definitely feathers on the Stalogy. I'm trying to, only have the smallest amount of ink, but it just feathers on this paper. So I'm thinking maybe I need to find another sort of nib to do ink swatches in the Stalogy, because that is what I journal in at the moment. So I do want a true reflection of how it writes. The next ink that I am swatching is Noodlers Black Swan in Australian Roses. I fell in love with this as soon as it hit the page. I think it is just gorgeous. It is pinky and purple and deep and moody. I think it would be dark enough to write in. I'm going to ink it up in a pen today because I just can't wait. But I just think it's gorgeous. Between the 2 pages, something I realised as I was doing these swatches is maybe swatching with Q-tips isn't for me, because I don't seem to get the same consistency. Now, obviously, it's going to look different on different paper, but I think I was having issues with actually getting the same or the right amount of ink on the Q-tip between the 2 swatches. I have seen some people do swatches with a paintbrush, and that's something I think I want to investigate, because I was just, Sarah and Q-tips don't seem to work well together. Who'd have thought? But back onto the Stalogy paper, you can see in the swatch to the right, even where it gets a bit lighter, I still think it's really legible. I just I wasn't sure about this ink, but I think it's beautiful. I think it's really, really beautiful. I also haven't decided what kind of little doodle or writing or whatever you want to call it I do underneath the name. I've tried some squiggly lines, some little leaves. Later on I do some more diagonal things. Is there one you like better than the others? I don't like the multiple squigglies of the Oxblood in the Clairefontaine, so that one's out for me. But yeah, I need to find something that suits my personality. Next up, I am swatching Pilot Iroshizuku Yama-Budo. This ink is fabulous, really. Look, I can't actually see myself inking a pen with it at the moment for everyday journaling, but I wonder for some planning where I want to have some real contrasting colours, it could come in handy there. Maybe, like planning Christmas presents as an example. For me, this ink just screams fun and celebration, so that's how I could see myself using it. The ink writes really nicely. I think the swatch went down really nicely in both notebooks. I think it's legible across both. It's just kind of a fun ink, really, isn't it? The Pilot Iroshizuku inks have such a fan following across YouTube and Reddit and Instagram and everything else, and I can completely understand why. They seem to just be really well made and well thought out, if that makes sense. All the characteristics of the ink, they just work, even if you don't really like the colour or gravitate to it. I don't know, there's something about those inks. What I was just showing just then is the ghosting. Obviously the stalogy paper ghosts quite a bit. The Clairefontaine, hardly anything at all. That is something to keep in mind if you are a stalogy user. The next ink I'm swatching is Diamine Aurora Borealis. Bit of a mouthful. I thought that this ink was going to be darker than it was. It's I guess a teal, a bluey green teal colour is what I'd call it, but on the lighter side of teal, whereas I thought it was going to be on that kind of deeper, darker green side. Again, it's a nice ink, but it might be a little bit too blue for me. Something I'm learning about myself as I am trying out new inks is I have an aversion to blue ink. Didn't know that about myself, but if I think about it at work, I actually always use a black pen, rollerball, ballpoint, whatever. I never go for a blue pen, but I was never conscious of it. Like I never really understood why, but as I've been researching inks, I keep trying to find some blue inks, pardon me, to test, and I can never choose one, and I have no idea why. Do you have any blue inks that you love or that helped you fall in love with the colour blue? If you could let me know in the comments below. I have no idea why I don't like blue, but I want to like it. I think there can be some really nice ones. I definitely think I'd go towards the darker blues again than the lighter, but please let me know if you have a must-have blue. Next up, it's another Pilot Iroshizuku ink. This is the Pilot Iroshizuku Fuyu-Syogun. Oh, my pronunciation, please forgive me. It's I call it a warm grey. I've written with this ink for a few weeks. I really like it. It is just a touch light for, full pages of writing or text. I use at the moment mostly fine and extra fine fountain pens, so that could also be part of the issue. In a medium or wetter pen, you might get, more colour, but I have actually tested it out with a thicker nib and it gets some really beautiful shading, which is incredible, but then, a full page of writing, as much as the shading is really nice to look at because it is a lighter ink, for me it was just a touch harder to read. I want to find a use for this ink though, because I do really, really like it. This ink I have tried to swatch separately in the stalogy a couple of times with this dip pen, and every time this one feathers like crazy. and I'm not really sure why. It's not a super dark ink. I don't know if it's wetter than some of the other ones, but it would just feather so much. But when I wrote with it, I had this inked up in a couple different pens. I probably wrote with it the most in my Lamy All-Star, which is an extra fine nib, and it didn't feather in that at all. I mean, there's always a bit of ghosting in the stalogy, but no bleed through or anything like that. The last ink I'm talking about or swatching today is my only bottle of ink, and it's Diamine Twilight. I love this ink. I have my Kaweco Classic Green Sport inked up with this. I just think it's gorgeous. When I talk about liking the darker side of inks, if I compare this to the Aurora Borealis, this is what I mean. For me, this ink is darker, but it still has character, it still has depth, it's still rich. I just think it's gorgeous. I'd call that, I guess it's like a tealy green, more on the green side, and there's almost like a touch of grey in there somewhere. If you look at the three of them together, the Aurora Borealis definitely looks more blue. In the Clairefontaine, the swatch definitely goes down darker. I like how this ink shows up across both papers. I just really like it. The different pens I've tried it in, it's always been smooth every time. Lays down what for me is a really nice amount of ink, which is not too dry, not too wet. I know some people really like really wet inks and wet pens. I struggle with that. I don't know if it's because I'm just new with fountain pens, but I feel like I'm constantly smudging things, and yeah, it's just, I can't handle it. But you can see with the two of them next to each other, it looks a bit darker in the Clairefontaine, whereas interestingly the Pilot Iroshizuku looks a bit darker in the stalogy, the one on top of it. But I just think it looks great across both. Doing a bit of a comparison now, and I'll do a close-up in a second. I think my favourite from this little batch of inks samples is the Noodlers Black Swan in Australian Roses, probably followed by the Robert Oster Thunderstorm. What's your favourite? Was there an ink in here that stood out to you? Was there an ink in here that you actually didn't like? Or for some of the ones I wasn't so sure about, have you used it and fallen in love with it, and should I give it another go? Please comment below on any thoughts and any advice on how to make ink swatching videos better. I don't know why, but I just struggled a little bit, but I hope you've still enjoyed watching it either way. If you could please like and subscribe, and I'll chat to you guys soon.